Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I want to share with you 8 common signs that you might have a hearing loss. Okay, so I know lots of people have hearing problems that they develop very gradually, and they're just not sure if it means they have a hearing loss or other people not speaking so clearly anymore. People often complain that the new generation speaks too quickly, which I'm sure is true. So let me clarify and demystify what you might be experiencing. The first one is that you have difficulty following conversations. So the first clear sign that you might be developing a hearing loss is not that you can't hear, and I think most people have the misconception that when they think deafness, they think no sound. That's a type of hearing loss. So being deaf means that you have no usable, you have no functional usable hearing. That type of hearing loss is extremely rare. That's the most extreme form of a hearing loss. That would be the equivalent of not being, when we think blind and we think not being able to see anything, actually, blindness falls on a spectrum. And similarly, hearing loss also falls on a spectrum from very mild, which is almost close to normal hearing, to profound, which is the equivalent of having, a jet engine next to you and for you not to be able to hear that very clearly, or for that not to be very loud. So, the first sign that you have a hearing loss will be that you start to develop mild problems, which means in lot in lots of situations, you'll feel you can hear perfectly well, which is why hearing loss can be quite deceptive. Lots of people that have a hearing loss will say that I'm absolutely fine most of the time. When people speak to me, it's just certain people I can't hear very well, or in certain situations I can't hear very well. And that's true. And that's because their hearing loss will present itself more in challenging situations. In a one-to-one situation, like we are now, for example, most people with a mild hearing loss are able to hear really, really well. It's only when you put them in more challenging situations, which we can talk about later, they will find that their hearing loss, their mild hearing loss, causes more of an impact for them. So the first sign that you might need a hearing test is that you're having difficulty in conversation. The second obvious sign that you might have a hearing loss is that there's been a change. That what was normal for you is no longer normal. So when you're watching the TV, for example, you're turning up the volume. So the second sign to look out for is when you're watching the TV, are you turning the volume up in order to hear more than you used to and more than what other people need? So if your wife's sitting next to you and saying, turn that down, that's really loud, or your children are often complaining, even though kids these days like it louder, um, it's probably a sign that you might be developing a bit of a hearing loss. I think that's interesting because, I'll tell you about my eyes. A few years ago, I was watching a program on TV, and I watched a number. And when on a TV program, somebody looks at their phone and they're trying to read a message, like a text message. For a few weeks, whenever that would happen, I couldn't read the message on the phone. It wasn't clear, and I'd keep saying, "Oh," and I assumed it was just the actual image on the TV wasn't clear, or they purposely had blurred out the text. After a few weeks, I asked my wife, and she said, "Oh, no, that I can read that." When I realized that it was my eyes that had lost some of their sensitivity, got an eye test, and indeed, my eyes were weakening. Similarly, the TV can be a good barometer for your ears. So if you're turning the volume up more than what others need, that might be a sign that you're developing a bit of a hearing loss. Number 3, that you're frequently misunderstanding what people say. So this is similar to the first one in that you're struggling in conversation. The third one, however, is reminding you that when you have a hearing loss, you won't miss out on everything, but you'll often miss out on parts of what people say, which will lead to misunderstanding. So the most common type of this is when people lose some of the high register of their hearing, the high frequencies, and that often means that they don't pick up on some of the sharpness of what people say. So they miss out on the consonant sounds. So if somebody says ship, they might think they've said tip. And because our brains are geared towards building meaning from our environment, the brain will often fill in the gap with the most logical thing that it thinks has been said, and it will do that correctly most of the time, but occasionally it makes mistakes. So if you're listening to people and they're often not quite clear, and you're often asking them to repeat themselves, and you're often misunderstanding what people say, you might be developing a bit of a hearing loss. The fourth one, and this is the saddest one probably, is that people that have a hearing loss often start to become quite withdrawn. And often older people will often experience this, where their hearing loss makes them feel like they're a bit of a burden on people, because, as we've said, they're often asking people to repeat themselves, they're never completely following what people are saying. And one way of dealing with that difficulty is to not put yourself in that situation. So they stop attending the gatherings they used to, they feel a little bit quieter when they're in the room, they try not to put themselves in situations where they're going to struggle, and it often impacts their lives. And this is really sad for me, because obviously, I think people should live their lives as fully as possible, and a hearing loss should never be a reason why somebody can't live their life as normally as possible. Clearly, it creates a barrier and it's a hurdle that we need to help those people with, and they need to help themselves with, but they shouldn't give up. So the fourth one is withdrawal from social situations. If you're finding that you're not so confident, you're not going out as much, and you haven't thought about it very much, it might be because you're trying to subconsciously avoid the difficulties that your hearing loss is causing. The fifth one is that you're struggling on the phone. So hearing losses affect us in all situations, but they often have much more of a marked impact over the phone. And that's because there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the primary ones is that the signal that we get through a phone is already truncated, is already diminished compared to the richness of the voice that reaches the other end of the phone. So by going through that phone line, the signal we're getting on the other side is not as rich and as clear as the person who spoke it. So we're already losing some of the frequency bandwidth that we would normally hear. And when a person has a hearing loss, they're going to lose even more of what they need. And the second reason is because our brains, as I said, like multiple sources of information in order to make sense of meaning. And when we can see people's lips and we can see people speaking in front of us, even if we haven't actually learned lip reading, we all do it to a certain extent. So when the person in front of us speaks to us and we're looking at their lips and we can see that they've moved in a certain way, even if we haven't heard everything they've said, we can still often make up for the lack of information of sound by the visual clue. When we're relying on the phone, often we've lost all of that. So if you have a hearing loss, you're going to particularly struggle on the phone, especially if your hearing loss is getting worse. You will struggle quite significantly on the phone at times. Number 6, ringing in your ears, or what we call technically as tinnitus. So tinnitus is a sensation that a person hears a sound like a ringing or a buzzing in their ears or in their head. It's not exclusively a sign that you have a hearing loss. Many people have tinnitus and they have really good hearing. Other people have really bad hearing and they have no tinnitus. But you are more likely to have tinnitus if you have a hearing loss. The next one is that you're straining to hear. Hearing for those of us who are lucky enough to have normal hearing is a passive activity. Our brains are extremely intelligent. They're often making automatic decisions about the incoming stimuli. They're deciding what's speech, what's background noise, which parts of speech that we want to attend to, which is back. So all of this is happening in our subconscious. We don't need to think about it. However, when you develop a hearing loss, you often that passive activity that we take for granted often becomes an active activity. So people that have a hearing loss now have to strain to hear. They're having to put effort into hearing, and effortful hearing is very tiring. So if you're finding by the end of the day that you're quite tired and you really try to hear and you're not able to grasp exactly what people are saying and it's really tiring you out, that's another sign that you might have a hearing loss. And the final one is related to that straining, is that you're increasingly tired. You've got increasing fatigue. So the sense of tiredness is again related to the fact that now you're having to put active energy into what normally would be a passive activity. And this is quite a complex idea of of how our hearing filters our environment in order to make sound rich and meaningful, and how some of that filtering becomes problematized as we develop a hearing loss, which we can deal with in another video. But at this stage, it's important for you to realize that if you're feeling quite tired, just by listening to people, it might be a sign that you need to get help with your hearing. So they're the common signs that you might be experiencing, everybody, or you might know somebody that you love, a parent or a grandparent or somebody even younger who you often feel that some of that applies to them. Share this with them. You can download this from the website. I'll give you the link for you to download this and share it with them. And really do consider, if you do struggle with any of these, getting a hearing test. A hearing test is quick. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to do, and it gives us all the information that we need in order to give you advice about where you are on that spectrum, whether a hearing aid is helpful, whether it's needed, whether it's something you need. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to try a hearing aid or might not want to try a hearing aid, and we can give you that advice. And if it's not hearing aids but you have a hearing loss, are there any other technologies that are going to be helpful to you? So people like us who are audiologists know a lot of this information, and if you find the right person, you get the right advice, it can make a really big difference to your life. So I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you for joining me on this video, and I'll see you next time.